is Mike Redman, and I am alongside my co-host Darren Redman. And today we are talking about the Montreal Expos, going a little bit back in time. And today on the show, we have a very special guest. His name is Danny Gallagher. He's for 52 years as a writer, historian. He's actually wrote 10 books about the Montreal Expos franchise. But before we get into that, Darren, I believe you have some exciting news to share.
Yes, in the heart of Palm Bay, Florida, where the ocean meets the sky, there's a place where tax worries meet their end. Whether you need to file years of missing tax returns or current year return, or you need relief from a tax lien or a levy, Nashville Tax Relief Solutions has the solution for you. Introducing Nashville Tax Solutions, your trusted partner in the tax resolution industry. And I got to tell you, a lot of us need that. All right. At Nashville Tax Solutions, we understand that stress and the confusion that tax problems can bring. That's why we're here to offer clarity, relief, and a peace of mind. Our expert team of tax professionals are dedicated to providing personalized solutions tailored to your unique situations. Listen to what people are saying about Nashville Tax Solutions. I recently had the pleasure of working with Christopher Bennett, the owner of Nashville Tax Solutions, and I must say his knowledge and expertise in tax matters is truly impressive. He was able to provide clear and concise explanations. I wasn't lost in that fog, ensuring that I would fully understand the process and the best course of action for my specific situation. Chris's professionalism, attention to detail were evident throughout the interaction, and I felt confident and supported in every step of the way. I highly recommend Nashville Tax Solutions, and specifically Chris, for his exceptional service. Nashville Tax Solutions saved this person from a potential financial nightmare. They're not just experts in tax resolutions, they're compassionate as well. So don't let tax problems weigh you down. Contact Nashville Tax Solutions today and let them guide you toward a brighter financial future. Please email Nashville Tax Solutions at 615-502-2250 and check out the website at nashvilletaxsolutions.com or send an email at info@nashvilletaxsolutions.com. Nashville Tax Solutions, where tax resolution is achieved. Thank you, Nashville Tax Solutions. And Danny Gallagher, thank you for coming, my friend. This is such excitement for me because I have been a closeted Expo fan for years. And I'll get into that why in a minute. But Mike, take us away.
All right. Well, so I would always like to start these off, Danny, before we kind of dive into the fun stuff, just a quick biography about yourself, something that I might have not already mentioned, just to hear, so the listeners have a little something to get to know you by before we kind of dive in here.
Yeah, sure. I started writing general news stories in 1972 for a weekly newspaper in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, and close to where I grew up in, the Ottawa Valley near Ottawa. And then I expanded myself to going working for daily newspapers in Sudbury, Ontario, Regina, Saskatchewan, Ottawa, Ontario, and then Montreal, covering the Expos, and starting in 1988. So that's when I really loved, writing about the Expos, even though I grew up near Ottawa, cheering for the Expos in the, 1970s and the 80s. And by the time I got there in 1988 to cover the Expos, it was really quite a thrill to cover the Expos.
Oh, awesome. I'll tell you. And now you have a book that's coming out right now or very soon, correct?
That's right. It's called Explosion. I don't know whether you get that up on screen.
Oh, it looks good.
But it's my 10th book about the Expos, including the last 5 years in a row. What it is, guys, is a series of books, vignettes about the Expos from 1969 to 2004, different personalities, different people, different events. It's sort of like a sequel. Each book is kind of like a sequel of the other one.
Mm-hmm.
like Blue Monday in 2018, excuse me. That was a big book, and then I've written several others with Bill Young out of Montreal in 2005 and 2014. But it's really a passion of mine to write about the Expos, even though they no longer exist. They've been gone since 2004.
I think it's a shame they're not there. I mean, God bless the Washington Nationals, and they won the World Series. How did that feel as an Expo fan? Let me start there. Did you feel sort of pride, or did it hurt?
You know what? Because Dave Martinez was the manager of the Expos, and I covered him when he was with the Expos in the late 80s and early 90s, and he's a really class guy. So it was really nice in that way to see the Nationals wins because Dave Martinez was the manager. Sometime before that, his job was in jeopardy with the Nationals because they weren't doing very good, and they really picked it up, and they ended up winning the World Series.
You know what's interesting, and there's nobody, sincerely, I'm not just blowing smoke. There's nobody that can speak to this better than you about the Expos. The one thing from reading your books and just following your baseball, if the wild card existed when the Expos were having their run, they would have won multiple World Series. That's just my opinion. 90+ win seasons. They were a dynamic team. If the way that the Nationals got in and a lot of these other teams got in was present in the 80s and the 90s, this team would have won a World Series.
Well, you saw that team, the great team they had in 1993. They won over 90 games, and with a wild card, they would have get into the playoffs, and what they would have done. Just a wonderful team. And then they got even better in 94, and they got screwed by the strike and the cancellation of the season. 93, 94, two of the best teams that the franchise ever produced. And if there had been no strike and no cancellation of the season, they would have been able to get to the playoffs, not necessarily win the World Series, but show people in the baseball world that Montreal is a serious baseball franchise, and that they would have been able to keep that team, the 94 team, intact for several more years and be a dynasty. But after 94, the managing general partner club was sure wanted a few of those guys traded.
Yeah, when you look at the list of players that wore that beautiful uniform for the Expos, I mean, it's changed over the years, but that logo, I mean, most people don't realize that. I mean, you had, Pedro Martinez, Randy Johnson, you had, so many other players that blossomed in other places. And then we talk about Larry Parrish, and the players that came over there, the great Gary Carter and Warren Cromartie, who was one of my favorites, Ellis Valentine, and Andre Awesome, just amazing players. And their scouting must have been incredible. I mean, the proof's in the pudding.
Yep, and actually they have 7 individuals that wore that Expos uniform that are in the Hall of Fame, which is amazing considering their length of run. You had mentioned Gary Carter, Andre Dawson, Pedro Martinez, Tim Raines, Vladimir Guerrero. You can go across the board. There's some other names too, like you hear Marquise Grissom, Larry Walker, Dennis Martinez, Jose Vidro, names that might have not heard for years, but they had so much of an impact. It's just awesome to go down memory lane and just to remember, and it kind of takes you back individually, each of those players, to where you remember something special that they did. Is there someone, Danny, that we haven't covered yet that really sticks out to you in terms of the history of the team that you really enjoyed?
Well, Rusty Staub was my early franchise hero in 1969, 70, 71. Because he really, revitalized baseball in Montreal in those first few years, and he's called the Grand Orange, and he's such a tremendous person in the community and a great offensive player. He really stabilized the franchise in those early years, and his given names are Daniel Joseph, which are the same as me. So I've always considered him one of my favorite players, tied with Dennis Martinez. So there's the other guy, Dennis Martinez, who I got to know starting in 1988 when I joined the Expos beat. And he was always such a nice guy to deal with. Plus, he was a tremendous pitcher on the mound. And Dennis Martinez to this day, we're reasonably good friends who talk a few times every year. So he's always been a favorite along with Rusty Staub.
Rusty Staub. And one thing, Danny, myself and Darren, we're avid New York Mets fans. It's getting harder and harder to support that team. And I keep saying that I'm going to treat them a little bit better on this show, but it seems to be a common trend here, just from our early episodes. This is now, we're still in the single-digit episodes, but the Montreal Expos, their first ever game was played on April 8th, 1969, and they also, their very first win came at the expense of the New York Mets at Shea Stadium. I believe it was 11-10, if I'm not mistaken. And then they actually won their first home game a week later, defeating the St. Louis Cardinals. That was at Jerry Park at the time before they went to Olympic Stadium. Do you have any memories or anything you'd like to share about Jerry Park before we kind of dive into Olympic Stadium?
Well, just memories of that first game in New York, just, watching on TV. I never saw it in person, but Charles Rothman was there, the majority owner in New York, the first game of the franchise, and he had tears in his eyes, and the Canadian national anthem was sung at Shea Stadium. It was quite an event. As you said, the Expos won 11-10, and again, the pitcher had one of the home runs. And, one of my memories of the early days of the Expos at Jerry Park was as a fan. And me and some buddies went there, and I was collecting some beer from the concession stand. And George Foster of the Reds hit a high pop fly in foul territory, and it was coming toward me in the stands, and I had a beer in each hand, and I couldn't stop my beer from trying to catch the ball. That's kind of one of my memories.
Oh, that's great. That's
outstanding.
great.
And Darren, so we kind of talked about the transition to Olympic Stadium. If I'm not mistaken, you have a little bit of a memory you could share with us about that stadium, correct? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I do, and I'll get to that in a second. But I have one more Jerry Park question, because I used to like to watch the games from Jerry Park. They would, the announcers for the Mets would talk about how cold it would get at night. It was supposedly very windy. What part of Montreal? And I've been to Montreal a couple of times. Where was Jaffrey Park? I know where Olympic Stadium was, but where was Jaffrey Park?
Well, Jerry Park, Olympic Stadium was in the deep in the East End, and Jerry Park was west of Olympic Stadium, sort of in central Montreal, not downtown Montreal, but it's kind of like central and more accessible to reach than compared to Olympic Stadium. But it was the place to be from 1969 to 76, Jerry Park. Wee little quaint, small stadium that only filled maybe 25,000 people, but it was really close to the stand, close to the people, close to the players.
My partner in this, Mike, my brother, he mentioned, I have a story about Olympic Stadium. Before we dive in, I wanted to get your reaction about, and then talk about it in general. I went to see the All-Star game in Montreal in 1982. I sat right next to, if you look at the Expo sign, this says Expos, right to the left of that, way out in left center field. Enjoyed myself. It was a wonderful game. I just love the fact that I was out of the country to watch what was considered the American pastime. That's when I fell in love with the Expos and all things Montreal. Can you talk a little bit about that experience for the Montreal fans to have the All-Star game at their stadium?
Yeah, it's really something else. What was it, close to 59,000 people there, and you had 5 players from Montreal on the All-Star team. Range, Dawson, Carter, Oliver, and I think I'm missing somebody. And then the manager was Jim Bannon, so he was the losing manager in the 1981 series against the Dodgers. So he was appointed a coach by Tommy Lasorda. So it was quite an occasion to have Montreal host the All-Star game. It was really a special occasion, especially when there's 5 Expos picked to the All-Star team.
Yeah, listen, I enjoy. I actually like that stadium a lot. I really do. And I know in your book you talk about how they said that if Montreal ever gets another baseball team, it'll have to be a new stadium. But I really enjoyed my time there. Again, it was 1983, a long time ago, but it was nice. You knew the Olympics were there. You felt a little history. Talk a little bit about the experience of Olympic Stadium.
Well, 77 was the first year. I remember in the first home game, they were getting the stadium ready, and some of the players couldn't get into the stadium because it was all locked up. They were getting ready, and they had to get somebody to open up the doors and let the players into the stadium. It's kind of crazy. And Dick Williams was the manager 77, 78, and a number of years. And gradually, they got better after that bad season in 1976. Dick Williams took over. Tony Perez was signed at free agent. Dave Cash was signed. And gradually, some of the younger players, like Carter, Dawson, and those guys were finally starting to come into their own. Steve Rogers, a great pitcher. And finally, they were starting to get better and better. And then, 77, 78, there was so-so. 79 had a great team. Finally got over 500 for the first time in franchise history. And they almost get into the playoffs. You talked about the wild card. If you had a wild card, then the Expos would have made the playoffs in 79. And 1980, same thing. Very, very good team. Mike Smith hit that home run off Stan Monson late in the season to clinch the playoff spot for the Phillies. Right in that period, guys, from 79 to 82, even 83, the Expos were almost like a dynasty. And then they finally made the playoffs in this strike-shortened season and, made it in the playoffs, and they beat the Phillies 3-2, and then they lost to the Dodgers 3-2 on Blue Monday. But, that period of time from 79 to 82 was really electrifying for the Expos.
Yep. And we talk about the wild card and whatnot, but that year that you just referenced, 1979, check out this record: 95 wins and 65 losses. And they were not that's just insane to me, to wrap my head around a team that's 30 wins over 500 and did not make the playoffs. That just looking at that, it's astonishing. And of course you look at what I deem their 2 of their other better seasons, 1981 and of course 1994. But you mentioned Blue Monday, so I guess cat's out of the bag, might as well relive that painful memory one more time for those that may not know what we're talking about on Blue Monday. I certainly do, but would you share that one more time for those listening?
Yeah, the Expos took a 2-1 lead in that series against the Dodgers. Jerry White hit that electrifying home run off Jerry Rouse and put the Expos ahead 2-1. Steve Rogers pitched a hell of a game. And then what they should have done, the Expos moved in for the kill and win game 4, but they didn't do it. They just fell apart in game 4, and the Dodgers tied it up. And then on the Sunday, October the 18th, the game was canceled because of rain and snow, and the meteorologist, somehow the Expos wanted Ray Burroughs to get an extra day's rest, but that also meant a extra day's rest for Fernando Valenzuela of the Dodgers, so it went to the Monday. So then it was 1-1 until late in the game. And then, Steve Rogers, who was a lifetime starting pitcher for the Expos, had gone up to Jim Fanning, the manager, and the pitching coach, Galen Cisco, and said, I'm volunteering to pitch in game 5 if you need me in relief. So that's what Jim Fanning decided to do in the top of the 9th inning. And Steve Rogers has always told me that he was full of adrenaline and throwing way, way too fast. He was just out of control in terms of trying to get the ball over the plate. And so he did get Steve Garvey to pop the second, and then the second batter, Ron Say, hit a line drive deep to left field, right at the warning track to Tim Raines. And so there's 2 outs, and then Rick Mundy comes up. And that's when he's a left-handed batter. That's when Jim Fanning should have brought in the left-hander Bill Lee or the left-hander Willie Flyman, but he stuck with Steve Rogers, the right-hander. So he goes to 3-1 on Monday, and then in the highlights or the video of that particular at bat, it showed that Steve Rogers was pitching very, very carefully, and then on the he grooved one. He wanted to go low with his sinker, and he grooved it about belt high, and Mundy hit it out into the thick cold air of Olympia Stadium. It was quite an accomplishment to hit one out of Olympia Stadium. It was really, really cold. And that just sunk the Expos.
So, I want to unpack a little bit what happened in reading your book, and which, by the way, people, if you haven't read it, please read it. It's written brilliantly. I love how because I love books. I love how you tell the whole story and then give the background. A lot of people do both at the same time. I was shocked that they got rid of Williams, 2-3 weeks before the start of the playoffs. And because I'm a big Williams guy, I always liked him. He went on to have great success with the Padres. He had incredible success with the A's, great success with the Red Sox. He got the team there. I would never have put a manager who never managed at the major league level in 2 weeks before the playoffs began.
Well, Dick Williams, he was a hard-nosed disciplinarian, but the Expos players liked him. John McHale, the general manager, he's told reporters over and over again over the years that this is the 5th or 6th year that Dick Williams was the manager, and it just weren't clicking in that time of period in September, and he made the move to go with Jim Fanning. But I look back at that, they should have just stuck with Dick Williams. Mm-hmm. John McHale had also heard, and it was reported that Dick Williams, one of the newspapers reported that Dick Williams was going to be the manager of the Yankees in 1982, the next year. So John McHale wasn't too happy about that. So there was a number of factors that went into John McHale's thinking, but he should have stuck with Dick Williams. There's no way that Dick Williams should have used Steve Rogers at all. No way.
I agree. And you know what? One thing that people don't realize is not only, you mentioned brilliantly earlier about Steve Rogers' great pitching, but he also provided all of the offense, right? In the previous game, a couple of singles, a couple of RBIs. I mean, the guy, he did great, but he was not a reliever. And his ball was, he was getting on top of that ball, as you mentioned in the book so brilliantly. He was not ready. The spaceman built. He said he should not have been out there.
I don't know. When Rogers got two guys out and nobody on base, that's when Jim Fanning should have gone for the percentages and brought in Bill Lee or Woody Fineman the left time. And then at the same time, Jeff Rudin was also warming up with Steve Rogers before the top of the ninth inning. And there's some talk that Fanning meant that he was signaling for Jeff Rudin, but he was actually signaling for Steve Rogers. But Jeff Rudin had some elbow and shoulder problems, but he'd been cleared by the trainer to pitch in that game. And that Jeff Rudin had some pretty good success against Mick Mundy in his career. But Steve Rogers was out of his element. And Steve Rogers and I have talked about this many times. He was just full of adrenaline and trying to overthrow the ball. He had butterflies in his stomach, butterflies in his chest. He was not meant to be in that situation.
Yeah, different subject before I pass it on to you, Mike. One other thing that really, I think, gets overlooked is the tremendous job that the Expos did during those years, especially getting what's considered backbenchers. Ray Burris is a great example. We did very well with the Chicago Cubs. It was a great pickup by the Expos. Having people like, now my mind's drawing a blank here. Come on, you had Jerry Brothers was with the Dodgers. You had Jeff Reardon come in. Some of these guys that came in played pivotal roles, and especially when you had people like Ellis Valentine come up short. You gave him to the Mets to come and get Reardon, but you had John Milner. You had Willie Montanez. You had these guys that were not going to be spooked when it got tough. They knew what they were doing. And I like these backbenchers. That's what I call them. These people that are not the starters, but this was an experienced group that you had. You had Al Oliver come in, unfortunately, once Parrish left. But this was a very stoked team.
Oh, for sure. So, you had all the starters during that range in 79, 82, and especially 81. You had some pretty good guys coming off the bench. Jerry White. Jerry White hit that big home run against Jerry Rouse in game 3, and then he came up as the hitter to end the game in game 5 against Bob Welch. He came in as a pinch hitter, and Jerry Welch to this day tells me, I wish I hadn't swung at the first pitch against Bob Welch. And he grounded up. Jerry White is always a pull hitter, and he pulled it right into second baseman Davey Lopes and threw over to Steve Garvey. But see, on the bench, I think Jim Fanning felt an obligation to Jerry White. He had to switch around to be bat left. He had, as you mentioned, he had John Milner on the bench. There's Terry Francona, a young Terry Francona, which
that's what I was thinking of before. Yep.
But they decided out of courtesy and because Jerry White hit that big home run in game 3 to leave him there to face Bob Welch. I'm not really criticizing Jerry White. Jerry White is another one of my great, I don't know whether acquaintances or friends that I've had over the years. I just talked to him the other day by text message about different situations. He's really a wonderful guy and a great hero in Expos history.
But when you look at that team and you forget, like a guy like John Milner, I'm just bringing up not just because he played with the Mets, but he won a World Series just a few years prior with the Pittsburgh Pirates. He was on that team as well. I mean, you had some real experience with this team. Michael, I don't mean to take you.
Let's go there. You mentioned the Pittsburgh Pirates. That's a great transition here. So I'm going to spit off some interesting fun. One thing we like to do Danny on this podcast as well, is if there's any fun little stadium facts or little nuances about the ballpark we'd like to share with those that may not know. Some of these you may already know, so they may not. But let's start there with the Pittsburgh Pirates. When when you think 535-foot home run, that's just it's hard to wrap your head around that. But Willie Stargell of the Pittsburgh Pirates hit the longest home run in the history of the Olympic Stadium back in 1978, 535-foot home run, and actually a yellow seat was marked where the ball landed, and it's been since been preserved at this time. So fun little transition there. That was next on my notes, and you mentioned the Pirates, so I figured I'd jump right in there. So then also the $1.61 billion price tag is the second most expensive stadium outside of London's Wembley Stadium. And as you mentioned earlier, Darren, that stadium is still standing. And I believe part of the reason that stadium's still standing is I looked that up, and it's between $500 to $700 million just to cost to demolish that stadium. So big reason, I'm sure, why it's still up there. Largest crowd ever, 78,000 for a Pink Floyd concert at Olympic Stadium. Thought that was interesting. And then as well as the Montreal Tower, those you may not know, it's the tallest inclined tower in the entire world. Sixth tallest structure in Montreal, but the tallest inclined tower in the whole world. So there's just a few little things there that really jumped out at me I wanted to share. And you had mentioned how Jerry Park was just under 30,000 people that could fit in that stadium. And then, of course, when they moved to Olympic Stadium, we were talking about a stadium that fits over 66,000. One thing that almost happened, for those may not know, back in 1987, I believe, there was a plan to actually move downtown. It would have been a smaller 35,000 seat ballpark. I believe it was called Labatt Field, if I'm not mistaken. Didn't actually turn out. That would have been interesting to go from 30,000 to 66 back to 35,000. Never came into fruition, and they continue to play there, of course, through 2004. But yeah, so do you have any, Danny, any of those kind of facts I share that you can elaborate on a little bit? There's a lot of good stuff there. So
Yeah, you're talking about Olympic Stadium?
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
So Olympic Stadium, 1989, they had a team that should have won the a playoff with, that team, when they got Michael Einstein in the middle of the season, they actually late May. They really boosted that team. But they traded, in order to get Langston, they traded Randy Johnson, Brian Holman, and Gene Hurd, which it's a trade that's still debated to this day. So that was a great team that faltered near the end of the season, and it prompted Charles Droppin, he's going to sell the team, because they were leading a good part of the summer of the National League East pennant race, and they just folded in the last couple of months and finished at 81 and 81. Gary Carter was there for a long time until 1984 at the Olympic Stadium, and then at the end of the 84 season, he was traded to the Mets. That was, I don't know whether that was not that good of a trade, but the general manager, Murray Cook, was under orders, and Charles Droppin to trade him. In 1987, they had that Cinderella team that really captivated the Olympic Stadium, and they won over 90 games, and they never won a playoff. But there's another example of, if they had a wild card, they probably would have won it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's always about the wild card. You mentioned a wild card, because how often are those division leaders with those crazy multiple double-digit win, leads over the next closest team in their division, having to stop playing meaningful baseball so early, and it's always that hottest team at the right moment that gets in there and does the damage in the playoffs. Otherwise the Dodgers and the Braves would have a lot more championships than they have right now, and that early exit continues to happen. I really feel it's because early September, mid-September, they're getting to kind of dial it back a little bit by where everybody else has still got the pedal to the metal. So those Montreal teams, you look at how many 90 win totals that they had, absolutely the wild card would have gotten them in very, very often. So just unfortunate.
Yeah, for sure. Like in 87, 89, I had those, I guess I call them surprising teams. 88 wasn't that great, but then they turned around in 89, they had a good team. And then, they had 93, 94. So certainly with the wild card, but the Expos would have made the playoffs in a number of years, especially from 79 to 82.
Before we draw to a close, I think it's so important. You mentioned something so eloquently in the book Blue Monday about, and again, there are 10 books there. People, if you are a baseball fan, read them, read the new one, Explosion. But I want to harken back to this because you mentioned something that's so true. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and so I knew that Jackie Robinson played in Montreal. Roberto Clemente played in Montreal. Baseball, Major League Baseball, has to be, in my opinion, in Montreal. And I love how you brought that because most people don't realize that. I mean, this is where we actually opened the game up by Jackie Robinson. He played in Montreal for what, a full year plus with Alouettes, I believe it was. But talk a little bit about that, about the culture of baseball in Montreal.
The situation in Montreal, Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier in 1946 in the AAA Montreal Royals.
Oh, the Royals,
And,
that's it.
you mentioned that, Roberto Clemente played, not many people know that Roberto Clemente played AAA with the Montreal Royals in 1954. So there's some really great history in Montreal with the Montreal Royals long before the Expos came to being in 1969. The Montreal Royals went out of business in 1960. So what, it was 8, 9 years before the Montreal got a major league team. They beat Toronto. So it's really Montreal, and you can say was a pretty good baseball town, until the Major League Baseball decided to move it to Washington. Even though a number of years, guys, there was very, 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 very poor attendance in Montreal. But
why do you think that was? Why do you think that was? Why do you think the attendance went down? Because the play was beautiful, and when you guys win, that place is packed.
I think Montreal wants a winner. They have the Montreal Canadiens hockey team. Even though of course, that's a different thing. Montreal Canadiens hockey team, win or lose, they get about 21,000 people every game, and you pretty much sell out. But baseball, they wanted a winner in some years that they weren't winning that much, so not many people show up at the ballpark. So Charles Bronfman sold the team after the 89 season, or began the process, but he's told me several times it wasn't just the Expos fading in 1989, but he told me the other factor was that he was disappointed in the attendance over the years, that he was unhappy with the attendance at Expos games.
Right. And kind of ending here, wrapping this up, just as recently as a year ago, I believe, there was small discussions about actually the Tampa Bay Rays splitting half their time in Montreal. And I'm glad that didn't happen, not because of that. Montreal deserves, we talk about expansion and whatnot. They deserve one of those next two spots. Absolutely not to share a team with another city. They deserve it all. So hopefully that happens down the line. So again, Danny, we want to thank you. We want to thank you for being on here. I certainly learned a lot. I knew a little bit going in, but certainly have a lot. And I'm really interested in checking out some of those books, like you mentioned.
Danny, could you talk real quick? I'm sorry, Mike, about just give the people a plug again, let them know about the book, how can they get it, and everything else. Because people, if you care about baseball, and if you care about the Expos, you need to read these books. And they really should be.
Thanks so much, guys. The book is called Explosion. It's just a name that sort of suits the Expos. So I'm always coming up with different titles. but it's a 264-page book of memories from 1969 to 2004. So it's a collection vignettes, I guess I call them, and you can get it at Amazon. The foreword is by Andre Dawson, and it was good to get him. So it's a collection of, different eras of the early days, 1993, 94, 1984, 2004. So I try to go into that book with stories about the last days of the Expo in 2004. It was sad.
Yeah.
Memories from the employees and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm definitely going to check some of those books out myself, and especially someone like me who lives and sleeps and breathes baseball, that, may not seem that long to others. People always criticize baseball as the season's too long, but I'll tell you, when October is over and November begins, from November to like early March feels like an eternity. And those are the kind of things that reading those kind of books and kind of getting that knowledge really are the kind of things that get me by, because what seems like an eternity to me for others may not, but that's a long time to not have baseball. I live and breathe it, like I said. So thank you once again, Danny, for being on. Also one more time, want to shout out Nashville Tax Solutions. Chris Bennett is a good friend of mine. I'm very excited to have them on board with us here at the Around the Ballpark podcast. They are your trusted partner in the tax resolution industry, especially this time of year, tax return time. So like Darren mentioned, check them out, NashvilleTaxSolutions.com. Chris Bennett is your man for that. Danny, once again, thank you. We hope to speak to you again sometime in the future. Everyone have a great evening.
Yeah.